4 years in DP camp, they learned German. My mother dated, she said even one guy, he had a convertible, that I wanted to come to America. He was a doctor, he had a convertible, and there was such a longing in her eyes. And I wanted to come to America, and he did too. Finally, they got their papers, and they met at the Lithuanian Holocaust Survivors Ball, which doesn't sound very romantic, but in fact it was, because my father was quite a debonair gentleman, and I'll tell you about his being a watchmaker. I'll go back in a second, but he had his own store, he had his own Harley, he was single, he was 7 years older than my mother. He was an incredible dancer. So my mother brought her mother to the ball as a chaperone. There's my grandmother, you can imagine her probably orthopedic shoes and a black bag and dress, looking very dour and wondering if her daughter will find someone. She's almost 30, lost all those years to the war. I mean, it's quite awful. So she wants it to happen. My father asked her to dance, and he learns that my mother, they probably converse for a minute. He knows that she's a pianist, and he says, "My God, that's beautiful, you bring music." And she learns that he's a watchmaker, which is a setback because she wants a professional. But nevertheless, he sweeps her up, and they do this incredible waltz. And I'm not just making this up, because of course I wasn't born yet, and I'm the second child, but I've seen them waltz over the years. She left the floor, it was like the king and I, on top of which my father looked like a younger Yul Brynner. Very virile, very muscular, and a very sensitive face. Danced that, and then came the polka, or what they call now in dancing, it started the quick step. And so she was sliding. By the time they sat down again, she probably said to her mother, "Mommy, this is the guy." So those are the people that were my parents. And then my brother was born. I don't discuss him very much in the book, but my brother was born in the early 50s, and my brother was the apple of my mother's eye and my grandmother's eye because he was the first boy. And remember, they had lost these two brothers, so my grandmother finally saw a new boy. They made a big fuss over him. And my father was a little disappointed because my brother was like Huckleberry Finn. He didn't want to listen, and my father was very patrician and very regal. And my brother, when all children went to school, and they had decided that we would go to religious school, so there's a dual curriculum where not only you have to learn the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, but there's also Rashi and other rabbinical lore, and there's a whole lot of more things that would require what the Germans and the Jews call Sitzfleisch, which means, can you sit in your chair? And my brother really would have rather had one of those, what do you call, slingshots than sit in his chair. He should have been born in Mississippi, but now he was born in Washington Heights and had to go at the age of 4 or 5, it was in his case, and sit there and learn to read and pray and think about deeper matters. And I'm sort of convinced that that was why my father was so excited when I was born. Because as soon as I was born, I seemed to be very interested in learning their history and learning Jewish history and learning the context of the whole big world. And I was very sedentary, and I did have Sitzfleisch, and I did want to be told. And so there was a fertile ground. So I wanted to hear my parents' stories. I just want to go back for a second and say that my father, why he was a watchmaker. So just so you get the background, I'll read a few excerpts and you'll see how the story goes that I'm telling you today. Because there are a lot of people who were born of survivors, and there are a lot of survivors, not a lot, and most are sadly dying out, but there are probably, 100,000 people like me. But I tell a story in the book of how my parents went from possibly being, they were never destroyed, they survived, and they were strong, and they were remarkable, and they raised children and grandchildren, and created a beautiful life. But on some level, it was a deep urgency. And in the story I want to tell you, I feel like I released some of their pain and healed them and brought something better to the world. And not only to their world, but maybe to the world. So that's the challenge of the story. But my father's life was affected me too, hearing about it. That when he was a baby, and he was born in 1913, the Cossacks killed his father. His father was a miller. He had a water mill, and they ground flour. And he was standing there and got shot outdoors. And his mother, this Sonia that I'm named after, you can just see what kind of life she had, because she has 3 little children. My father's the youngest. And the older one, her oldest son, Aaron, he ends up going to another family to get an education. And that's a sad story because they treated him like a poor relation, and he was never the same. And then came Paula, my father's big sister, who was a beautiful blue-eyed brunette, and she probably loved to dance too. She quickly got married to kind of a rakish playboy, but they stayed married all their lives. And she survived because somehow she got arrested during the communist time that preceded the Nazis, was sent to Siberia, and everybody thought that was the worst fate in the world, but in fact, the Jews in Siberia became the Russian Jews that many, many years later were released, many coming to Israel. That's where she ended up. And there was my father sort of remaining by his mother's side. And by the time, and this is Lithuania, so it's a magic, cold, wintry, snowy place. And by the time he's 13, instead of having a bar mitzvah, which is a typical rite of passage, and no matter how poor you are, you probably would get together a little party, something. He didn't have that. He didn't have a mentor. He didn't have a father, and he sort of he fell into the cracks. And he was very athletic. I think my brother got something like that from him. He was a skater, and he would teach people to skate for for a little pocket change, to buy a book. He'd borrow books. He was very resourceful, but it all ended, and he had to go an apprentice. And in those days, you chose a trade, Now, this was a man who was so brilliant that he probably could have been a wonderful lawyer or doctor. And certainly the way he fixed watches later was with the hands of a neurosurgeon or anything like that, because imagine doing microsurgery on something with more parts than the human heart. He didn't complain, and he was actually very fortunate.
Caitlin, can you come to the circulation desk? Caitlin to the circulation desk. Thank you.
And watches were his circulation. So, yes, it was like the heartbeat of his life. In each pocket watch, a little heart that you could hold in your hand, and a heart that you could open layer after layer and see exactly what made it tick. And if it was broken and it was broken-hearted, you could fix it and restore it. And as a child, here were some of the elements. My father and mother talked constantly about the Holocaust. Most parents who went through this in my neighborhood full of survivors didn't talk about it. They'd sit outside, there's no air conditioning, sit outside in the courtyard of the buildings and talk about happier times, or say how nice the air felt, or talk about their children and their plans. Once in a while they'd make a wry joke about the past, but not tell the children. My father and mother told me from a very early age, somehow they felt they could talk to me, and I was listening, and I was being told things that were quite major, and that it was something that even if we hear it now as adults, we don't know what to think and what to say, that the world had evil in it, that something had happened, that people could kill each other, and even children, because I must have asked, and even children, for no real good reason. They hadn't done anything bad, and that moreover, this had happened to my father before, and that it happened to the Jewish people. This was their perspective over and over throughout history, and they could talk about those times, and they would bring up different events and different holidays, where the Jews often say the holiday is, they tried to kill us, they didn't, let's eat. So they would talk about the Passover, for instance. Passover, where the Jews were slaves, and my father said, and I was there with Pharaoh, and I was watching my fellow men being beaten, and I didn't dream, but I did dream.
Attention patrons, will the owner of a green GMC Denali license plate DSM9138 please move your car immediately? You are blocking the driveway and you're in a fire zone. Thank you.
It's going to be hard to weave that into the sentence, but I'm wearing green, actually, parenthetically, because I believe in springtime and I want it to come, and it's what, March 16th?